Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone after our unduly long break due to the Yom Neroim. Before I say anything, just because it's on my mind, and I'm sure on all our minds, obviously, we're all in incredible pain about what's going on, and it's Baruch Hashem to have a vibrant base medrash and to be able to focus on Talmud Torah is a bracha in these times, and our learning should be as a chus for Klal Yisrael. I was perilously close to cancelling Shiur today, I have to confess, because I was feeling completely overwhelmed by the sugya of Muktza and Masechet Shabbat. We have a very short sugya over here, but it's a little bit of a I don't know if I can call it a shas sugya, but it's certainly a whole of Muktza. I'm just muting everyone else besides myself, those who are online, but please unmute yourselves if you want to say anything. It's quite hard to sort of make Seder out of what's a bit of an overwhelming topic. So please forgive me in advance. In a sense, I'm just going to try and pick off bit by bit whatever I was semi-successful in focusing on in learning this sugya, and that means that it's been a bit hard for me to sort of guide everyone else's learning. So I'm just talking about the topics that I managed to get something with on the sugya, rather than perhaps what's a better way of learning, which is trying to work our way through the Gemara and draw everything out of the Gemara. So that introduction said, let's start. We have a Mishna. Rabbi Zobin, Kol hakelim nitolin chutz min hames hagadol v'yosei shel machrisha. So Yosi says all kelim can be nitol, can be taken, can be moved, besides the Mesa Godel and the Yossi Shel Machrisha. Now, what are these implements? So Rashi tells us what they are. One is some sort of saw, and one is a blade that's used in making furrows. And Rashi says that what's unique about this is that copied alayu yachid namahem makom to l'chozi la melacha acheres. So Rashi defines these kelim that you're makbid on them, you're particular about them, you're miyachid for them place, and they're not suitable for any other melacha. So really there springs to mind immediately on the Mishnah, to me there sprung to mind two questions. The first question was, and every Mishnah really consists of a case and a halacha. So the first question is what's the case, and the second question is what's the halacha. That's the basic two questions that you always ask on every Mishnah. All Mishnahs are structured like that: case and halacha. Sometimes halacha may be a machlokas, so it may be case and then two opinions on the halacha. But every Mishnah is a case and a halacha. That's how Mishnahs are structured. So the two most fundamental questions when you read the Mishnah is what's the case and what's the halacha. Now, when I say what's the case in this particular instance, I don't mean what's the metzias of the case. Sometimes when you learn a Mishnah, it's hard to understand the facts, what implement is being described. In this case, I'm not going to worry too much about exactly how this furrow making blade works or how this saw that cuts wood works. I'm not going to overly dwell on that, but I want to know conceptually what's the case. And in halacha, what's the ruling? Let me just explain what I mean. Let's start with the halacha. What's the ruling? The answer is that these kelim are not nitolin. They can't be taken. So all kelim can be taken on Shabbos, can be used on Shabbos, can be moved on Shabbos, but these kelim can't be nitol on Shabbos. That's the rule. Even though the Mishnah is not structured in a case halacha manner, but effectively that's what's going on in this Mishnah. There's a case, which is these kelim, and there's a ruling about these kelim, which is they're not nitolim. So what does not nitolim mean? All kelim can be nitol. Well, 1 minute, we've just said other Mishnahs that told us about Muktza. So it's not true that all kelim can be nitol. In fact, we had we've already had previous Mishnahs which has told us about kelim that can't be nitol, but somehow other kelim can be taken in a way that these kelim can't. So what does that mean? In what halachas are there that are unique about these kelim? And that's the first topic that we're going to look at, which is what is there unique about these kelim? What can't be nitol about them? Tosfos, and the reason I put Tosfos straight away on the Maramokim is because Tosfos already mentions, for example, one of these halachas. He says, "Afilu b'sorech gufo," they can't be taken sorech gufo. So now we begin having an answer. Normally, Muktza kelim can be used for sorech gufam. I mean, that's what we came from. Let's not forget the history of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah started off by telling us that a normal kli, which is Muktza, for example, a hammer, which is a kli shemalachta le'issa, nonetheless, I can use it for a mutter way. Sorech gufo, I can use my hammer, my blacksmith's hammer, to crack nuts. However, these kalim can't be used as sorech kufay. So that's one example of what the halacha is. But before we go into details, that's question number 2. I'm saying out of order, but that's one of the questions the Mishnah is. What is the halacha the Mishnah is telling us? That these kalim can't be nittel. In what way can they not be nittel? How are they different to other kalim? That's my second question. My first question is, what defines these kalim? What's unique about these kalim? What makes this category of kalim different to other kalim? And if you think that the Mishnah is an exhaustive list, we immediately have the memra of Rav Nachman and the memra of Abaya that begin listing other utensils. So clearly there's a class of utensils, a category of utensils that fit this halacha. What category of utensils is it the Mishnah is talking about? So in brief, the Mishnah tells us a case, a category of utensils, a halacha that they're not nitolin. Number 2, I want to know what does it mean they're not nitolin, and number 1, I want to know what's the categorization of this case. The reason I keep on dealing with question 2 instead of question 1 is because I'm actually going to start off by looking at the halacha and then try and look at the category. So I'm going to go in reverse order. But just to explain what I mean when I say what's the class of kalim that we're talking about, Rashi already immediately plunges us into the confusion, because Rashi says 2 or 3 definitions of what makes this class of kalim different. Rashi says, "Kopid alayu umiyachid lahem makom delechazinu melacha acheres." Now he says 3 statements. How do these 3 statements cluster? I'm not entirely sure. He says you're makbid on them, you dedicate a space for them, and they're not chazinu melacha acheres. They're not suitable for another melacha. Because they're not suitable for another melacha. So is the core categorization just that they're not suitable for other melachas, and the result of that is that you're miyachid makom and kopid alayu, or is it the other way around? That you're kopid alayu? Is it 3 definitions? Number 1, you're kopid alayu. Number 2, miyachid makom, and number 3, because they fundamentally are not chazi for melacha acheres. Or is kopid alayu a headline? Kopid alayu is the category, and this manifests in miyachid makom to the chazim. So whenever you see a sort of we have too many riches in this Rashi, right? He's told us 3 statements, but we don't know what is the critical statement. That's the definitive feature of what makes these utensils unique. And we're going to see basically that even though in Rashi it's a bit hard to tie down, I haven't yet come to a clear conclusion about Rashi's view about what's unique. We will see explicit Rishonim that discuss this concept of what is it that makes these kalim unique. Which one of these factors is the critical concept? Even though in Rashi we're sort of overwhelmed by richness of choices about what Rashi means, but at least Rashi's opened up for us very conveniently this confusion about what is the critical definition of these unique kalim. Yes, there's 2 reasons I haven't mentioned that Rashi. Number 1, because it comes later, but also because Masechet Shabbat, it means you somehow. It's not that they're somehow merely by default separate off, like maybe Klishim after Issa. There's a more positive activism in separating them off. But my question is more fundamental than that, which is, but what is that separation of? What's the critical cause of uniquely separating them off, and what is the separation of? Is the separation of that lo chazinu melacha acheres, or is the separation of that kopid alayu, or is it that miyachid makom? What are you doing when you're being muktza them? And I will point out that I really asked 2 questions on the Mishnah. What's the halacha and what's the category of kalim? And I said I'm going to talk first about the halacha and then the category of kalim, because the 2 are intertwined. Because maybe if the uniqueness of the point is that you don't do it for other melacha, that will define what sort of muktza it has. Or maybe if the uniqueness is that you don't move it around, that will define what the muktza is. So we have to start somewhere, and with this introduction said, I'm going to start somewhere. We have to zoom in on something in order to do it. Yeah.
Can you say in Rashi's wording, he says the love puzzle machar acheres. That seems to be the reason, because the first 2 statements, kapid alayhu umiyachid, that's 2 things, but both of them, the love puzzle machar acheres. So wouldn't that seem to be the critical one from that wording?
You're right that in Rashi the start of the process is the not chazinu melacha acheres, and the effect of that lo chazinu melacha acheres is that kopid alayu miyachid makom. The reason I'm hesitating a bit is because even with that there's some confusion. Is kopid alayu miyachid makom 2 points or 1 point? I'm not entirely clear. And even when he says the lo chazinu melacha acheres, I'm not entirely clear how to translate that phrase. Does Rashi mean you're makbid them and yachid and mokum because they're not chazu melachot acheres, or so that they shouldn't be suitable for anything else? Because you don't want, if it's a precious thing, you don't want to. In other words, we'll see later. For example, it's a bit hard to relate to plows and things like that because we don't know enough about them. But let's talk about another example which is more relatable to, like a very sensitive knife, a sakin shel shchita, or sakin shel mila, and ismol shel mila. These are some of the examples that Gemara elsewhere use. So technically speaking, a sensitive knife like a ismol shel mila or sakin shel shchita is suitable for other roles. You could use it to chop your sandwich, but you wouldn't do that because you don't want to, because you don't want it damaged. So when Rashi says whilst I initially definitely read it like you, Max, and that seems the more sort of instinctive reading, that the reason you're meyach and makom is because they're not suitable for any other work. Maybe it means meyach and makom so that they shouldn't be used for anything else. The whole point of yichud makom is that you don't want to accidentally pick up your sakin shel mila and use it to cut up the kugel on Shabbos. So,
well, wouldn't he then say that? Wouldn't he use the wording so that you don't use it for something else?
The word dal in Rashi is an Aramaic equivalent of a shin in Hebrew, sheh. Yeah. And if I just said to you in Hebrew, sheh loy something, it's not entirely clear how to translate that phrase. Whether it means that, in other words, it's a result of that, or that in order. It's a little bit unclear in Lashon HaKodesh and in the structure of language which one it means.
But I'm focusing more on the chazu. Doesn't chazu mean fitting, rather than, if he wanted to say what you said just now, wouldn't he use the word?
Not entirely. Yeah. Fitting could be because fundamentally it's not fitting, or because you're makbid on them, so that it shouldn't be fitting, so that it shouldn't be used for something else.
Right.
It's not. You don't want the sakin shel mila to be used for something else because it will get damaged in the process, and in that sense, it's not fitting. It's not that it's not fitting that it couldn't be used for anything else. It can. Again, a sensitive knife can be used to cut the kugel. It will just damage it. So you don't want to use it for anything else. So, and this gets actually Paul's point about Muktza be your dime. The whole point is you separate it off because you don't want to use it for something else, not because physically, in terms of its physical properties, it can't be used for something else. So Rashi remains a little unclear to me. I hope B'meshach the sugya, and as we learn other sugyas, we'll get clear on Shittas Rashi. But at the moment now, I can't look anyone in the eye and say I'm entirely clear. But Rashi is useful because he brings out the stodim that the Rishonim do speak about what's the critical element of this. Yeah.
Roughly the fourth referred to that second Rashi introduces the fourth condition, which I'm just arguing.
Yes.
So we've actually got four conditions. We've got
yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Thank you for that. And it's a fine point, and I sort of slipped into saying it without bringing the source, which is Rashi. Rashi doesn't say why they're chazin melachot acheres. Our Rashi we've been focusing on doesn't say, and I began assuming like there is more shmina because it gets damaged, but I should have said my source, just because Rashi later spells out explicitly that the issue is it gets pogrom, it gets damaged 100%. So again, it brings up, is that the explanation of why lo chazi? I jumped into assuming it was, but I stand corrected. Maybe I shouldn't. That itself is an assumption. The reason why it's lo chazi is because because it gets pogrom, it gets damaged by using it for something else. But is that yeah? Okay. So sorry. Yeah. I believe so, but it's an Aramaic word, so I'm not entirely sure. I probably should look up the etymology of the word. If it's linked to the Hebrew word, then yeah. 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 Let me double check the etymology of the word. Yeah. Okay. So that's our hakdama to the sugya. We have a Mishna which tells us the case and halacha. We need to explore what's the case, what defines this category of kedim, and what's the halacha. What are they not little for? What sorts of things are they not little for? So I want to jump to the second question ahead of the first question, which is what's the halacha? What are they little for? So Tosfos already tells us. It's Tosfos on the Gemara, but I referenced Tosfos earlier. I said everyone should see the Tosfos immediately on the Mishnah. Tosfos gets into a discussion with Rashi about what sakina the ashkavta is. Rashi says it's some form of butcher's knife, and Tosfos says it's a sakin shel shchita, which at least is more relatable for us. Tosfos brings up the word shemakbid again on this. that you're makbid that it shouldn't be damaged. And then he says, one has to be careful not to use it even l'tzorech gufay. And then he brings in Rabbi Shimon, that even Rabbi Shimon, who generally is less. I've avoided being too drawn into the machlokes Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Huda so far in learning Muktza, just as a little overwhelming. But basically, the Gemara and the Rishonim talk about Rabbi Shimon as if Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of Muktza and Rabbi Huda does hold of Muktza. That's a little confusing. It's not that Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of Muktza; he holds of all sorts of Muktza. But he has a more limited categorization of Muktza, and Rabbi Huda has a broader categorization of Muktza. So he says even Rabbi Shimon, who limits the halachas of Muktza, agrees that you can't move something which is delicate and would be nifkam by an alternative use. You can't move it l'tzorech. You can't move it l'tzorech gufay. Okay, so we have a explicit rishon that tells us that unlike, for example, the klishim lachton issa, where you can move it to Torah Gufay, so the cornus, the hammer of the shalafachim of the blacksmiths, you can use to crack coconuts with. However, an implement which is easily damageable and crosses the threshold of this type of Muktza can't be used for another permitted use on Shabbos. That's the nafkamina, that's the halachic implication of the Mishnah. Does this extend also to l'tzorech mekomo? So again, without getting too much drawn into the previous sugya, on the sugya on Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph, in Hakol Modim B'Sichi Zeyu Mazon, the Kevin Kappa Delay Miyachad Mimakom, Hachanami Miyachad Mimakom. There we saw the idea that these it was machlokes what Sichi Zeyu and Mazuri meant. They're either dyers, as in colouring processes, dyeing implements, or weaving instruments. But the Gemara says, the copy dolayu, Rashi there says, the uman is makbid, shlois lachlchu, shlois akmu, you're sensitive to them because you don't want them to get dirty or to get warped. And therefore these are sensitive implements. Miyachnu mokum, Rashi there again says, Muktza yodayim. So these seem to be parallel language to what we're seeing in our sugya. So just to remind everyone, have a look in Kuf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph. In Kuf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, it was Mavua, that along with not being able to move them l'tzorech gufay, there's also l'tzorech mekomo. You can't move them l'tzorech mekomo. That's what the Gemara there is saying. That so we've now got a clue to where Rashi on the Mishnah says miyachid l'humakom, where he gets that language from, because we reminded ourselves that Amir Omid earlier we saw that language in something that sounds very similar to our Mishnah. There's these there's these sensitive influence which people are miyachid l'humakom for. Okay, so this is a superb point. Adam is now saying a second point, which is besides the sugya, and basically actually these 2 points are the 2 points that the Rishonim bring to prove the discussion. Besides Rav Nechemia, which we already met, that's going back. If we go forward, because I asked everyone to learn the Hamshach of the sugya, it seems clear that there is a kal v'chomer from Tzorech Gufay to Tzorech Mekomo. In other words, something that's Tzorech Mekomo is more of a chiddush to allow it. Something where Tzorech Gufay is asa, kal v'chomer Tzorech Mekomo is asa. So again, just to summarize so we don't get lost, a klisha melachto le'issa, even though we call it Muktza, it's Muktza in the sense that you can't stum move it. You can't move it from the sun to the shade just because you don't want it to overheat. However, you can move it if you need it for a heter need. What's a heter need? Either to use it for a mutter function, like the hammer to crack coconuts, or because you need its space, which we call tzorech mekomo. We've seen that this, for shorthand, I'm going to call our sugya klishin lachto, Muktza machmas chasaron kiss, even though we haven't quite yet met that label yet, but it's just a convenient label. The Mishna says that Muktza machmas chasaron kiss, however exactly we define it, can't be moved. Tosfos tells us that means you can't move it l'tzorech gufay, in other words, you can't use it for another use. Rashi on Rav Nechemia links the two, and he says, you're miyachin mokum because you're worried that it's yislach leich or yiskalkel, you're worried that it'll get dirty, or yisakim, it'll get warped, and therefore you don't move it, and you don't think. Argument number one. Argument number two, the Gemara later seems to say that the Tzorech Mekomo is more of a chiddush to allow than the Tzorech Gufay. What's the logic? Because Tzorech Gufay, I'm using it for an internal function of the keli. Tzorech Makoma, I'm merely using it because of an external need. I want the space of the keli. So if Tzorech Gufo is not allowed, in other words, the keli is so removed from use that it's not made for an alternative use, Kal V'chomer, I can't allow it to be moved to Tzorech Makoma. That's the Shura, what you see from the Gemara later. I want to pause as to whether that logic I just said is really accurate or not, because I just want to summarize the shape of the arguments that I put forward, and then we'll unpick actually what's impeccable logic and what isn't. But that's just a summary of Adam's point, and it's a fine point to show him make this point. It's a good starting point in the sukkah. It's a kal v'chomer.
But Abai doesn't agree with that.
We'll get to unpicking the argument soon, Max. I'm not claiming it's a good argument. I'm just saying that it's definitely an argument that deserves to be made, and the Rishonim make it, but it doesn't mean it's an ironclad argument, and we could unpick it, and indeed we will do so. It's going to end up in machlokas basically, whether this is a knockout blow or not. But definitely Adam is correct. It's a good point to mention. That is the implication of the Gemara. Whether it's the last words on the subject, that we'll see. Okay, so just to summarize the lay of the land, I don't want to overwhelm any of us with too many sources. As I said, I myself was feeling a bit overwhelmed even this morning about the whole thing. But basically, I printed on the source sheet the Beis Yosef in Siman Shin Ches. I printed the Beis Yosef at length for two reasons. One is because he gives quite a nice summary of Muktza, of the different categories of Muktza, and therefore I thought we've never really. I believe Adam's given a chaburah on the topic, but we've never really in the Shiur sort of stepped back and laid out all the different categories of Muktza and so on. So the Beis Yosef is a nice summary of the different categories of Muktza. So it just and the reason, he's a summary also of the reasons for Muktza, which again we've never really gone into. So since this is the Beis Yosef, I printed that. But the second reason I printed the Beis Yosef is because he really discusses this point. But arichos, I cut out vast chunks of the Beis Yosef because it's pages that he says on it. But since since our role here in the Shiur is to try and focus on at least some of the more accessible Rishonim, he brings a raya he brings really two rayas to the Beis Yosef from the Rishonim. One raya is the language of Tosfos, very interesting. Tosfos says, afilu l'tzorech gufay, you can't move it. So he says, what's the afilu l'tzorech gufay, even l'tzorech gufay, but kal v'chomer l'tzorech makomay. So he reads Tosfos as saying, the klisha melachot issa can't be moved, even for tzorech gufay, how much more so it can't be moved for tzorech makomay. I'll leave it as a bit of homework, whether you think that's a good diuk in Tosfos. It's a Beis Yosef, so this is how the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Zobin, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, read the Tosfos. But it is an interesting reason for Tosfos, because we could have understood that afilu simply means, as a vis-a-vis, a normal klisha melachot, which you can move the tzorech gufay. You can't move it. Obviously, you can't move it mechamer l'tel, but even the tzorech gufay, you can't move it. We wouldn't have thought meant even a tzorech makoma, but the Beis Yosef does think that's what Tosfos means. So that's just something to think about a little bit. What the diuk of the Beis Yosef is. And the second diuk of the Beis Yosef is equally fascinating. I tried to print the Rambam in sequence in order that you can see the point the Beis Yosef is making. But if you look in the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos Perek Chaf Hei, basically in Halacha Gimel, he talks about the halachas of klisha melachta and heta, and the halachas of klisha melachta le'issa. He then, more or less spends 6 halachas speaking about different examples of these categories, and including again and again how they can be moved to tzorech gufay and tzorech makomay. And then in halacha tes he says, kol klisha. Now he reaches in halacha tes what we call Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss, our Mishna. He says, Kol kli shemakbid olav shema yifchasu domov. Any kli where you're worried about it losing its value, for example, merchandise in a shop, also the talton Shabbos. You're not allowed to move it on Shabbos. And this is Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss, Kagon HaMesach HaGadol, and he quotes our Mishnah and the Gemara that follows. So this is halacha tes, where the Rambam brings the category of Muktza machmas Chisaron kiss. So the Beis Yosef is very simply medayik. In this halacha, he doesn't mention any exceptions of tzorech gufay, tzorech makomay. The whole way through halacha gimel dalet hey vav zayin ches, 6 halachas, the Rambam is telling us about the exceptions that you are allowed to move klisha melachta le'issa, the tzorech gufay, the tzorech makomay. Comes along halacha tes, and he simply says it's really just the Mishnah, right? He's just quoting the Mishnah, but the Rambam structures the placing of this Mishnah when he brings this Mishnah and halacha tes straight after the other category, and he just says also the taltel, and he doesn't mention a word about it being allowed to tzorech gufay the tzorech makomay. So Beis Yosef thinks this is a knockout raya in the Rambam, that the view of the Rambam is that you're not allowed to move it the tzorech gufay or the tzorech makomay. Ad kam, that's the more or less the end of the Beis Yosef. So just to summarize the state of play, Tosfos says you're not allowed to move in a Sorech Gufay. The Beis Yosef says that a filo of Tosfos means even a Sorech Makomo. The Rambam quite conclusively doesn't seem to say Sorech Gufay or Sorech Makomo as an exception. Implication he wouldn't allow either the Sorech Gufay or the Sorech Makomo. And L'chora, seemingly we have two rayas for this principle. The earlier statement sugya revolving around of Nehemiah and Omud ago, and the Hemshech of our sugya, in which there seems to be in the Sorech Makomo seems to be more also than the Sorech Gufay. Potential weaknesses in those arguments, those proofs from the Gemara and Tosfos. Does Tosfos afilu mean that? Is that correct? Number one. Number two, Rabbi Nehemiah, at the end of the day, no one explicitly links that conversation around Nehemiah to our topic, even though it seems quite parallel concepts, but it's not spelled out that what's going on there in that sugya. In fact, it's a bit weird. Why is the Gemara bringing Sichizeri and so on from an Amora? Why doesn't it say this is a Mishnah later on? We asked that question when we learned the Gemara. So it's exactly the same thing. That's our Mishnah. Why does it need to bring these weaving and dyeing tools and so on? Just say that's a memory of Rav Chinana Bashalmi Mishmei Rav. Why bring a statement from in the name of Rav when we have a Mishnah about this concept of Chisaron Kiss? So maybe that concept isn't quite Chisaron Kiss. Maybe it's a unique halacha and you can't extrapolate to our Mishnah. Number one, and number two, the Kal V'chomer. Whenever you have a Kal V'chomer, maybe there's a svara that this is somehow different, and you shouldn't be comparing the two scenarios. And we will see the alternative viewpoint. I didn't print on the source sheet the Rishonim who argue on the Beis Yosef, simply because they were a little less accessible. However, there are those that argue that it's also l'tzorech gufay, but not also l'tzorech makomo. And Mitzvah Hashem will see that in the next year and try and unpick what they would do with these arguments, because that does interest me. What I would ask everyone to think about, though, is in homework time, is number one, this diuk and Tosfos. Where's the Beis Yosef coming from, and is it a good diuk or not? Is it a good diuk? The Beis Yosef says, but is it a knockout diuk? And number two, what would be the svara to allow the Tzorech Gufay and not the Tzorech Makomo? What vision of Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss would that give? Clearly, if the essence of Muktza Machmas Chisaron Kiss is that you're makbid not to move it, then seemingly obviously it would be after the Tzorech Makomo also. But what would be a working definition of Chisaron Kiss, which doesn't include moving and which would make the Tzorech Makomo allowed, even if the Tzorech Gufay is also. So we'll stop here for today. And Hashem, there will be a shiur on Tuesday, even though there's another very important event going on in there. And if anyone wants to attend it, they should do so. But I'll make the recording publicly available. There will, Hashem, be on there an evening about dealing resilience and dealing with challenges and difficult times and so on, which connected to what's going on. But even beyond that, we all go through difficult times, and it's important. We've got a Rav coming in and a therapist coming in to discuss that. The result of that, though, will be that event will be in here, and we will be in the main shul. We'll section off a section on the main shul for our learning on Tuesday, but there will be learning still on Tuesday. Hashem. It will be recorded for those who want to attend the session here, and we will be learning for those who want to learn, and it will be in the main shul. Not apologies that we're moving the chaburah. I try not to move this chaburah. There are occasions where it's appropriate to do so. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I wish everyone a good day.
Thank you.